The problem of associationism with the problem of being, um, an attempt to think these problems in a fruitful way together. It occurs to me, the first thing that occurs to me is it's not absolutely necessary that we should give priority to the problem of being. So, for instance, Heidegger says, why is it that along with physis and ethos or ethics, the founder of the first, first successor of Plato, roughly contemporary of Aristotle, has in his sort of academic organization, if you like, placed these three categories: physis, ethos, and logos, all on an equal footing. And Kant is also so many thousand, 2,000 plus years later, 2,300 years later, affirmed this manner of organization. But the point I'm making is, why isn't logos just one thing alongside others? So one could as well say, why isn't memory just one thing? One thing alongside others. Why is logos have such a great? Of course, we have a long tradition explaining why logos is so key, especially for philosophy connected to the dianoia or thinking. But so I just say that in order to say it's not obvious that just because memory and in connection the causal theory of associationism should be treated as somehow subordinate to being. Maybe being, logos, memory are very close. So let's first start with, nonetheless, just as a well, maybe it's just a prejudice taken in Nietzsche's way. It seems to me Jung's way is lower. Jung's way is to say, and sort of basically on the level of Zizek, is to deal with the concept of the unconscious in connection with Bewusstsein or consciousness, where we then have the notion that beside from what actually is, there's also something else. There's many sort of liminal concepts like this, like especially in the time of German idealism in Leibniz, the petite perceptions as against apperception, both categorized sort of under the genus of perception. Petite perceptions are sort of like peripheral. They could also be called maybe peripheral perceptions, not fully grasped, but then not fully grasped consciously. So then you get this sort of, one, you have perceptions as sort of representations, therefore not as the real object, sort of on the notion that apparently the basic notion of that is the assumption that perceiving animals are obviously, if I perceive a landscape or a tree, say, this pollard elm, that somebody else could also be perceiving it, and therefore that there's something that the others, the bird. Say there's a I saw a crow going by just now. Say the crow is also got a representation. Then it's sort of, we slip in sort of obliviously into this notion of there must be, each one has their own representation, their own perception. And then therefore there's an object, and then the sort of, is there a sound of a vehicle at a distance if no one's listening type of problem come in. But if we don't make that assumption to begin with, we sort of have a different approach. So Heidegger doesn't make that assumption to begin with, but then he's saddled with the difficulty of how to sort of get the first way into that, which I think his first way in is through Descartes and Hegel, because also Husserl has taken this path by saying, through the cognito ergo sum, and through the in the beginning of the main logic in Hegel, which is still on the same way of thinking about being in connection to. We also, I guess we could connect up Hegel maybe more finely to the Nietzsche's way of thinking of becoming. Although Nietzsche also sort of in a groping way, but he doesn't conceptualize it. He doesn't sort of make it as clearly his constant project as does Heidegger. Points towards this attempt to simply question. You could say Nietzsche is more radical in a way, because Heidegger is determinately saying the human being is special, whereas in Asian philosophy they don't say that, and determinately saying that one of the most special things about the human being is that they arrive at the concept of being, and therefore we're going to question the concept of being. But okay, that's what we're trying to do on through the path of memory. So let's reset. So Jung says, when you have association, and so look at Jung's first paper. So he says, which I think somehow he wrote it with somebody else, or did the experiments with somebody else. Maybe he wrote the paper on his own, but the experiments were done with someone else, and then he felt compelled to use the language of associationism, even though he explains at the beginning that he doesn't think it makes sense. He doesn't think it makes sense because he thinks if somebody reads, say, a list of words or something, and then it goes into a kind of, I'm not sure I don't remember the terminology exactly, but something like a black box on metaphor. But this is the unconscious. So he has recourse to the concept of the unconscious in connection to all these problems of representation, as in German idealism, as in Kant. Now, one can say, taken that way, we remain empirical. We remain causal. Empirical and causal aren't necessarily the same thing, and I think Jung would say we go beyond the point that critical reason comes to a halt. We probably go outside the causal, the normal. We go outside Aristotelian cause or scientific cause, which are different, I believe. Even though there's usually, it's supposed that Aristotle already had the so-called efficient cause, but I think that's questionable when you look at it with some nuance. Synchronicity, for instance. This has an empirical basis, but it's not exactly causal in any of the Aristotelian or scientific senses. But nonetheless, when we're dealing with the notion of the unconscious, we're dealing somehow with something like causality, or maybe better put, with empiricism. I think Jung himself always understood himself as an empiricist. Thus his, I would say, rather arrogant statement, although it's common among, it's sort of just an old-fashioned statement in a way. It's common among spiritual people to say, I don't have to believe in God, I know. But let's put that aside. That's not the main thing here. But in a way, it makes God into an empirical concept. And I think Islamic religion is more prone to do that, whereas Christianity is more prone towards the transcendence, and towards the analogy in the West towards the analogy on the good, in the East towards other concepts such as the stillness of Gregory Palamas, or Palamas. I never can remember the pronunciation, but or the mountaintop, being on Moses on a mountaintop, some access to the transcendent, rather than the mere empirical experience. Maybe dropping the word mere from that, rather than something that's in any way could be understood as empirical experience, including Jung's Red Book, including the most mystical visions of Jung. Sometimes, but anyway, we're trailing off. Let's just stick to the main problem, which is here, put in simple sense, we have an issue of something to do with, possibly with memory, if the unconscious has to do with the petite perceptions, or the not yet apperceptions. And then what we're really focusing on is the causal chain rather than memory itself. So now look at it again. Let's look at it the most simple way. We remember something, and then we say, why did we remember it? And we try to construct a causal chain. And so then, therefore, this uncanny and dread, we sort of, if we see it, we might feel dread and fly from it, and the dread might take the form of considering it absurd and not worth thinking about. In explaining why memory happens through a causal chain, we totally evade the problem of that there is memory. What is memory? What is memory in existence? We have the dread of existence in a certain way. That's what Heidegger, not exactly on that problem, but on the same ground, basically accuses Husserl as the dread of existence by putting in always inserting the Natureinstellung at the base, rather than allowing things like memory to have the same ground of existence. The dread of existence, the flight from existence. If we, instead of trying to explain memory through something else, through association, through more subtly through the theory of the unconscious, through causal chains, through study of the brain in modern psychology, in experimental psychology, study of how the brain operates. If we, instead of trying to study how memory operates causally, we ask rather, how is it that there's memory at all? What is memory at all? I'm trying to set on analogy with the question, how is it that there's being at all? And then you see that this is a big part of what Heidegger's, as it were, claim that everyone else is merely ontic with respect to being. Merely ontic points then in the direction of everything I'm thematizing there as empirical or causal. Everyone else is not directly faced up to the Seinfrage, is what he's claiming. And so, yeah, you could see, I think, again, just to recapitulate in the most direct way, we tried to ask, how did this memory happen, a memory, and then we gave a causal explanation of some kind, and therefore we missed the question of how is memory at all. And likewise, the tradition has not broached the question, how is being at all. Instead, we get, in the versions that are closer, things like Hegel's account of being as becoming, or Bergson's flipping of Hegel, or Nietzsche's sort of sidestepping into the disregard of any such question, and therefore making sort of, it's as though, in a way, Nietzsche said, well, it doesn't matter because any such questions we ask about, whether it's about being, whether it's about nature, in connection to his questioning of the Stoics trying to evade what's coming forth of its own by being in agreement or engaging with what's coming forward of its own. Any such questions, according to Nietzsche, fold into nihilism, but then Nietzsche constantly feels that he must sort of be like in the Bacchae, where the Theban state is reinitiated. He constantly wants this reinitiation and movement out of the Dionysian state into art as power, into finally the will to will as the existential sort of keeping place of his own being. So we could make some unclarity about sort of who is more radical, Heidegger or Nietzsche.